Welcome to another one of my author interviews. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing Terrie Farley Moran. And Terrie is currently the author of the Murder, She Wrote novels, which, if you haven't read them, they're fantastic. And the latest one that she's written is book number 56 in the Murder, She Wrote series. And it's called Murder, She Wrote Death on Emerald Isle. Terrie, thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate it.
Oh, Michael, I'm delighted to be here. You have no idea how happy I am. This is always a good thing to talk about Murder, She Wrote and Jessica Fletcher.
Well, thank you. That's great. Yeah, these books, I mean, it's something but you saw. I recently interviewed Thomas B. Sawyer, who's the head
Yes.
writer of Murder, She Wrote. And I met Tom, I think it was back in 2013 at Thriller Fest in New York City, which, for those who don't know, is a thriller writer convention where you have these amazing authors show up, everyone from Lee Child to Michael Connolly to, at the time, Anne Rice and others, these legends. And just to be in a room and hear them talk about their creative process and how they do what they do and how they're just as insecure as the rest of us, I think is really refreshing. And when I was there, I got to meet Thomas B. Sawyer, and I heard that he was the former head writer of Murder, She Wrote. And I thought, oh my God, I love that show. And I watched it growing up and couldn't get enough of it. And then also at the convention was Donald Bain, who is the author of the Murder, She Wrote novels.
Oh, yes.
And those books, for those of you who haven't read them, they continue. Each book is almost like an extended episode of Murder, She Wrote, and they've been going now for 56 books for years, and they're just wonderful. And Terrie, you've written the most recent one, and so I'm curious, how did this opportunity even come about for you to get the chance to kind of step into those shoes of John Land, Donald Bain, and those who've written these books before you?
I'm a very lucky girl. Here's what happened. Don, as you know, wrote the first 47 books, and he was clearly an idol in the writing community because basically whatever you asked Don to write, he could write. He did ghosting, he did co-writing, but since the late 1980s, while the TV show was still on, he was writing the Murder, She Wrote books. Unfortunately, he got ill, and there was still an existing license agreement between Universal Studios, who owns the rights to Murder, She Wrote, and the Berkeley Prime Crime Division of Penguin Random House. So when Don got sick, he told his agent was also John Land's agent. He brought John on because John was well experienced. And John finished the book that Don had started and wrote like 4 or 5 more. I don't know what happened. John had a lot of projects going on, and he may not have been able to continue, but there were 4 books left on the license agreement. And we went into quarantine the weekend of like March 14th, 15th in 2020. And as a nice Irish girl, I was a little cranky because St. Patrick's Day was March 17th. Now there's no parades. I usually make my grandchildren do the grand march throughout the house. No grandchildren, there's nobody, there's nothing. I'm not going to the parade on Fifth Avenue. So I'm in my house, I'm singing Irish music. I got it playing on the, on the DVDs or CDs or whatever the young people call them. And I'm making soda bread. I'm all by myself, but I'm having a St. Patrick's Day party, and the phone rings. So I answer the phone. Happy St. Patrick's Day, because that's what it was. And this woman on the other end sounds very hesitant, and I vaguely recognize the voice. It's my agent. Apparently, since John could no longer continue, Berkeley was looking for somebody to take over the Murder, She Wrote books. So I knew nothing about this, but I had been writing for them. I wrote 3 books of my own. I co-wrote with Laura Childs. So my agent said to me, a job fell into our laps. I don't know if you'd be interested. And, sometimes I've said no, mostly I say yes. And I said, what is it? And she said, Murder, She Wrote. And I was like, I'll do it. So she said to me, well, don't you, agents are very smart. Not like writers. We're like, I'll do it or I won't do it, blah, blah, blah. Agents want to know all this technical stuff. So she's like, don't you want to know about the money and the terms? And I said, no. I've been a big, huge fan since the first episode in 1984. I've seen every episode a million times. I've read every book. I want to do it. So then she calmed me down and made me listen to terms, and I have to write 2 books a year, and no matter what she said, I was like, yes, I want to do it, because I've been a huge fan since the first episode, way back when. How they picked me, why they picked me, whether they asked 27 people and they all said no and then they got to me, I don't know, I don't care. I was very, very happy to be asked. And I've had a wonderful, stressful, because it's Jessica Fletcher and everybody has their own thoughts about her. And B, that I have to write 2 books a year. But
Yeah.
I consider myself extremely, extremely lucky to be doing this.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So you mentioned that when you came in, there were 4 books left on the contract?
Yes.
And how many have you written so far? Have you already written all 4 at this point?
I wrote all 4.
Okay, so then what happened? Did they renegotiate and say, let's extend it for however many? I mean, how did that work?
Okay. Now you're asking questions that in my mind are not writer questions, but I can answer them because very recently I found stuff out. I don't pay attention to all of this. They've been renegotiating the contract for, forever. I mean, it was like a whole year they were talking about it. So what happened is Emerald Isle is the final book on the last contract. And that just came out. Because of the negotiations, there will not be another book this year. However, I can tell you there will be at least 2 books next year. And that's all I know. Because I'm going to eventually sign a contract, but I haven't seen a contract. Technically, in the writer world, and I guess it's like a superstition, you never talk about future projects until the contract's signed, even though for months that you're going to, that you've been asked. They said, would you do it? You said yes. Your agent approved, but you don't say anything till papers are signed. I have not signed papers, but I'm telling you, there's going to be at least 2 books next year. And after that, I can't answer because I don't know.
Okay.
But they talk.
Right, but that's exciting to hear. Well, happy to hear that you'll be continuing to write the Murder, She Wrote books.
Yes.
And so when you came into writing that first book, from what I understand, I mean, when I was talking to Tom, when they did the TV show, they basically had almost like a list of rules to say, okay, here are the things Jessica can do, can't do. Here are all the things you need to follow, and you can't break any of these rules. How did it work with you with the book? Did they say, here's the binder? Who gave you these rules? I assume you got some rules. Nope. And how is this all presented to you as here's the world within that you're working within, and you can't go outside of these boundaries? How did that all work?
No, here's what I'm going to say. I knew there were rules because I'm a Murder, She Wrote groupie. Mm-hmm. So if I was at a conference and Dawn Bain was speaking, I was in the audience. If Dawn Bain wrote an article, I read the article. So I knew that, and as a fan, I approve that Jessica will not have a serious romantic relationship because her independence is part of her persona. It's what a lot of the readers and the viewers like about her, is that she can, travel around and do whatever she wants to do and is beholden to nobody. There is also the funny story of when Dawn wrote the first book, he had her, I think it was Get Out, get off a plane at an airport, rent a car, and drive away. And of course, she doesn't drive. So that was a big brouhaha. So, the issue becomes, I think, these books originated, this series, because there were 4 books back in the early 80s based on actual episodes that somebody else wrote. But Dawn started writing in the late 80s. The books and the agreements about writing the books are so old. I can't imagine there's anybody still working who had anything to do with them. I'm going to say that my first editor, who has since changed to a different editor, I don't think my first editor was born when Dawn started writing the books. I mean, the project is that long. So basically, I had to kind of wing it, but because I've been around the Murder, She Wrote field, although I was writing other things at the time, I always knew about this stuff. And I have my own personal rules for Jessica Fletcher, but there are standards that she has to. There is a gentleman that Dawn introduced early in the books, and he had planned for him to be the romantic person. And it just was not acceptable, and they put their foot down. And in fact, I was talking to a fan one time who was at a speech that Dawn made, and somebody in the audience asked him about this guy, and he said, no. He said, I had a romantic scene in there and they made me pull it out. So I'm assuming the rules they made for Dawn at the beginning apply to me. So far, nobody's told me I've done something wrong, but readers have different opinions.
Right. Yeah. And I think the character you're referencing is Chief Inspector George Sutherland of Scotland.
George Sutherland, yes.
Yeah.
George. And I believe he's named after Dawn's grandfather.
Oh, interesting.
I think Dawn said that one time. I have that in my head. I hope that's true. I hope I didn't just lie to everybody, but I think that's true.
That's it. So it sounds like when you send in your books, the editing, you don't get a lot of feedback saying, oh, she's not allowed to do this or whatever, because it seems like you're kind of so in tune with what has been written before, both through TV and the books, that the editing that you're getting back is probably just really based on the writing itself, not necessarily breaking rules, right?
Absolutely. I've been very fortunate. I was extremely nervous the first book, even though, like I say, I read all these books. I own most of them, some I got out of the library, but most of them I own. I've been reading them for years. So there is a pattern to it. But as I say, there's no rule book anymore. There was, someone somewhere had one, but it's long gone.
Yeah, very interesting. So for this latest book that you have is The Murder, She Wrote, Death on Emerald Isle. I recently read it. It was very good.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
So now when it comes to coming up with the premise for these books, the title, is that all you? Do you pitch to them, hey, here's the title I'm thinking, here's the premise, the location, and then you just get approval? And what does that look like? Is that like a 1-page pitch? And then they give you the green light and you say, okay, I'm going to go for it?
No, almost. Here's what happens. When I looked at the list of books, now I'm looking at it as an author. The first thing I saw was that the books John wrote were all in Cabot Cove. So I said, in my first book, she can't go to Cabot Cove. She can't stay home because she's been home too long. And there's a lot of people like the fact that Jessica roams around and meets different people and gets into different situations. So my first decision, since I had 4 books that I knew I had to write, was first book, she's going out of town. Then I'll bring her back to Cabot Cove. Then I wanted to bring her to New York, but show people. In most of the books and the TV series, the only New York Jessica was ever in was Midtown Manhattan. I'm a native New Yorker. it's a big city. I live 22 miles from Midtown Manhattan, and I live in New York City. So I wanted to show a different part of the city. And then I wanted her to go to Ireland because both Angela and Jessica had ties to Ireland. In the TV show, Jessica went to Ireland a few times. Angela's mother was born in Ireland. Angela owned a home in Ireland and had Irish citizenship, but she never went there in any of the books. So that was how I planned it. No one told me I couldn't. How it works, because I already had the contract for the 4 books. So I picked the first book. I decided on Columbia, South Carolina. I wrote, and I'm sure my editor wishes that I wrote a 1-page synopsis. My synopsises go on forever. I write them, they're like 10, 11 pages. It's really, for me, not that I'm gonna have all these things happen in exactly that order. Some of them will never happen at all, but it's basically my ideas. So when you read it, you get the general sense. The only things I know for sure is, well, Jessica's going to solve the crime. I know who's going to get killed and who's going to kill them. The rest of it is pretty much seat of my pants. So I give myself a structure and I send that to the editor. The editor looks at it and then sends back if there are any questions. Generally, because I sent so much, they're like, yeah, that looks good, go with it. And that's what I do. And that's been every one of my books, not just this series. That's kind of my approach. As I say, I think they wish 1 page would be sufficient, but not for me. 11 pages, 12 pages, but it's like brainstorming, if you have to do something. So
Yeah.
that's how I do it.
That's great. And something I also think that probably applies to these books, same as they do for a lot of books with recurring characters, is age, right? So I assume with these books, age is kind of irrelevant, right? Jessica's almost like, and Seth and everyone else are kind of frozen in time as we remember them from the show. It's not like anyone's celebrating like an 80th birthday or something like that. Age just doesn't really come into the picture. It's really what the person imagines them as they were on the show. Is that kind of the way you heard that?
Absolutely. And where that comes in for the writer is this. I sent her to Northern Ireland. Now, I actually have ancestors from what is now Northern Ireland and also from what is now the Republic. So I'm in tune with Irish history. She was in Belfast and other places that were all affected by the Troubles, but you can't mention that. Brexit, can't mention that, because those things are moments in time. You have to leave. You can't say Queen Elizabeth died and now King Charles is the king. You can't say Joseph Biden is now the president of the United States. Like she can't be sitting in a diner and a flash comes over that the streets are going to be frozen because President Biden is driving through, which is what happens in New York City when these big shots come all the time. That can't happen because that pins a time. So they are absolutely timeless. And sometimes you just want to say, well, for example, I was questioned about, she now uses a cell phone. And that's, they weren't using cell phones. But my response was, but at the beginning of the TV show, she was typing on a typewriter. And by the end of the TV show, she was typing on a computer. Like, you can modernize without pointing to the time change with a significant issue that will pin a year on it. Because I had a cell phone in the 80s.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. It makes me think of, so this past year, one of the writer who I enjoyed, who I had the opportunity to interview, is Stuart Woods.
Mm,
passed away, and he had the Stone Barrington series, and he
yes.
was known for Stone Barrington was essentially almost like a James Bond type, where he was this guy who would just sleep with a bazillion women and have a ton of money and just like total um, uh,
Total fantasy.
right, exactly. But you would think like, my God, we're in like book number how many, and he's still sleeping with all these women. How old is he by now? But that's the thing. He would just ignore time because I mean,
Yep.
the first book I think came out in like the 90s, but so by the 2022, it's a little far fetched. But I think that's the point of a lot of fiction, right? Is escapism. You're not necessarily looking for
Yes.
nonfiction, reality based entertainment. You're really just trying to go away to a fantasy of some kind, and I guess you're thinking about that too yourself, right? When you're writing these murder she wrote books, knowing that you're doing a lot of it by the seat of your pants. Does that kind of keep it exciting for you? Because as you're writing it, you're not really sure where you're going to go, so you're trying to make it as enjoyable for the reader as you are for yourself.
I don't think so. And the only reason I don't think so is because and I say this all the time, and other writers go like this and smack me in the back of the head, but writing's a job. It's work. If I'm sitting here and I'm writing a poem for my own enjoyment, that's one thing. If I'm writing a manuscript that has to be on my editor's desk at a time certain, that's work. I can't afford the luxury of wandering off to my own enjoyment. Hence the 11-page, documents that I have in front of me with little sticky notes on it, because now this guy isn't going to be in it or whatever. But you have to know that this is a job. Publishing is a business. It's like when I go to the doctor, if I have an 11 o'clock appointment in the morning, I can't show up at 2:30 in the afternoon. And it's the same thing with writing. I have to do it. Everybody enjoys typing the end. I enjoy that. I like getting there. I like seeing my progress. Well, now, okay, the guy's now dead. Okay, now somebody found the body. Okay, now Jessica gets involved in some way. Okay, now steps in my head. But I don't find that writing itself is this big, great pleasure and joy. It's a job. It's something that has to be done so that at the end of the process, the reader gets to read the book. It's not about me. It's about the reader. Everything is about the reader and getting the book to the reader and making it the best possible book that I can. But for myself, I'm happy it's over when I finish writing them. And then I don't mind reading my own books. I just got a copy of Death on the Emerald Isle, a PDF copy from my editor, because I have to proof it because now they've restructured it for the paperback.
Oh, okay.
So you have to look for, and a lot of times it's like, do I have to read this again? Not me. I'm like, oh, good, I get to read it again, So I do enjoy the books. I still reread John's and Don's, I enjoy the books. I enjoy the show, but the ones I'm writing, that's work. I have to do that properly, as if there's a boss going to come in and, check my work, which 500 people are going to check it before it's published.
Yeah, and that's something. And I love John Land, and I consider him a friend, and I've known him through Thriller Fest and things like that. But boy, some of the reviews of his Murder She Wrote books, fans will take you to task. I mean, he got beat up over certain details or certain tones or styles or whatever. People were like, they would just, I don't know. I guess they noticed the transition from Donald Bain to him, and that bothered people. They're like, oh, this doesn't feel right, or this seems incorrect, or she wouldn't do that, right? And I noticed it with you. and I'm not trying to criticize John. I think it's probably very hard shoes to step into, and it's, anyone would make some sort of mistake, or you can't please everybody. But with your books, I've noticed that the reviews have been, overwhelmingly positive. So I mean, I at least as a writer, I haven't published a book yet, but I know that when you put in a lot of work and you get that type of feedback, that kind of makes you feel like, oh, okay, then it was worth it, right? Because you get that
Yes.
feedback. Do you
Yes.
feel that way when you, especially with such a passionate audience?
Yes, and I will tell you, I get direction. I laugh all the time. I get direction from the readers. I have a list of places where they want Jessica to go. I have, when they first found out I was writing the books, and as an aside, I will say, I am sure that one of the reasons that I was chosen was because I am a cozy writer. I write cozies, and Jessica, she would really fall into amateur sleuth, except that everything about her books checks off the boxes for cozy. There's no gratuitous violence. We don't see the murder, all those things. That's all cozy. I write cozy. I have such huge, an example of the correspondence. We talked before about the contract between Universal Studios and Berkeley Prime Crime. While that was going on, I was getting consistent emails and Facebook messages from people wanting to know what the latest was. The fan base of both the TV shows and the books are heavily invested. And that's a good thing for the characters, for me as the writer, to know that someone's going to read it after I'm done with it. But they have very strong opinions, and they're entitled to their opinions. It doesn't mean that I'm going to do as they ask or as they request. But I respect everything, everything they say. The first book I wrote was set in South Carolina, and a woman sent me an email when I announced that it was going to be in South Carolina, and she told me she was a South Carolinian and she would be watching, and I better not get anything wrong. And I said, okay. And then when I had a question about something in South Carolina, I sent it to her, and she was like, yeah, that's okay, you can do that. I mean, they're helpful. If you don't take it as criticism, if you take it as, these are people who want you to write the best book ever. And they were not happy with Universal and Berkeley that they took so long to reach an agreement. So I bore the brunt of that. But they're heavily invested in Jessica and in wanting to see fresh material about her. Even though we all, run to Hallmark and all these other places at 11 o'clock at night and watch the episodes 100 times. We're very, I say we, because I'm one of them, we're very invested. And that just, part of that is that you will hear from them, as I did, as John did, as Dawn did. If there was a difference between me and John, it was that John is by nature, if you read what's his Texas Ranger lady, if you read those books, he is a thriller writer, for lack of, he writes thrillers. So to transfer thrillers into Jessica Fletcher was a difficult thing.
Yeah, Caitlin Strong, I think, is who you're thinking of.
Yes, Caitlin.
Yeah, something I find really interesting too is, so one of my favorite authors is Lisa Scottolini, who is just fabulous.
Yes.
Writer and a wonderful person. And I went to one of her book signings once. I've been to many book signings, and when you go to a book signing, it tends to be that most readers are women, and most readers are, middle-aged. Now, I wonder, like with Murder, She Wrote, I would assume, well, I do know from talking to Tom, that Murder, She Wrote's audience was an older audience. And that was back in, the 90s and
Yeah.
when it was on. Yet here we are in 2023, and these books are still like getting hundreds of reviews on Amazon. I'm sure they're selling thousands and thousands of copies. So do you think that just kind of new generations are just kind of discovering Murder, She Wrote and can't get enough of it, and that's just leading to the surge, I guess, in these book sales? Because I mean, it's pretty remarkable that a show would run for 12 seasons and that it would have 56 books that followed it, and
Yes.
that it's still going strong. I mean, I feel like there has to be, new blood, if you will, kind of coming into the Murder, She Wrote novel fan base. Do you agree?
Oh, absolutely, because I get the occasional email from somebody who used to watch the show with their grandmother. And now they're watching the show and reading the books. Interestingly enough, although I watched it faithfully for 12 years, my kids didn't pick it up. But two of my grandchildren, who never watched it with me because they weren't born, are interested in them. One of my granddaughters asks me for copies every time a new book comes out. Now, I don't know if she's more interested that grandma wrote them, but she can talk to you about Jessica Fletcher like I can talk to you about Jessica Fletcher, and she's 16.
Wow, that's great. I mean, and I'm in my 30s, late 30s.
Right.
So I mean, I've always felt like, and I was a weird kid, I guess. I watched Murder, She Wrote, and I watched Golden Girls. I enjoyed like more adult shows rather than, I mean, I did watch cartoons and all that, but I always felt like an old soul. But yeah, I think that's wonderful because there's really nothing like it. I can't think of another show, because there have been novels and things that have tied into other TV shows, but I think it's like unparalleled. There's really nothing that you can compare it to, where there's another classic TV show that has had this many novels that have followed the show and lasted long. I just don't know of anything else.
Yeah. Well, I will tell you, and again, I love the readers. One of the readers just told me, which I didn't know, that there are some Diagnosis Murder books. Remember Diagnosis Murder, the TV show? I didn't know there were books. And I looked, and there are 9 books. And, 9 is a lot. And any writer who has a series that goes for 9 books, you're happy. But as you say, nobody has come anywhere near, and you have to give huge credit to Don Bain, because he kept them interesting enough. The books were interesting enough for the readers to be waiting. In fact, I will tell you, and I forget who the lady was, but there was a woman, when it was announced that John Land would not be continuing and that I would pick up the series, this woman wanted them to keep John and hire me so we could have 4 books a year. Like, they take a book a month if you could write them that fast. The readership is, this is very important to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the characters, when I was talking to Tom Sawyer, he mentioned that he created the character Seth Hazlet because he realized that in Cabot Cove, all these murders are happening. And he's like, we need to have some sort of doctor, some sort of character who's just there for medical purposes.
Yes.
And Seth is a wonderful character. And he has a weird way of talking, right? There's type of language you need to put in there. And I mean, is there a character, I mean, other than Jessica, who you really enjoy either reading about or writing for, or just enjoy watching because of the show?
On the television shows, I generally enjoy, well, I love Seth. Everyone loves Seth. So if you put Seth aside, I enjoy, regardless of where Jessica is, her relationships with law enforcement. Because at home, when it was Tupper, Amos Tupper, for the first 4 seasons, he was portrayed as a little bit of a, not quite bright, and she could lead him around. And then when he left and they changed the sheriff, to Mort Metzger, Mort was much more, well, he was a former New York cop, and he was much more, I can handle this. Like, he, in the beginning, he was so funny because he didn't think anything ever happened in, small town USA. And then every time you're in Cabot Cove, there's a murder. But he, even though he had a higher understanding of investigations and stuff, he and Jessica still managed to become very close friends. And that was appropriate for her hometown. And it was remarkable how often she was able to do that when she wasn't home and a murder would occur. And she'd be in a town she was never in before. And the law enforcement guys in the beginning would never want to hear from her because who is this crazy lady? And by the end of it, they, by the end of the show, they were working together. And I do like that she never dismisses them. Like in some amateur sleuth worlds, and certainly in some of the thriller world, they dismiss the local police and they are the stars. That's not her way. And I appreciate that about her, because you could be like her much more in the real world than you could be like a guy that says, get out of the way, cops, I'll handle this.
Yeah, that's a good point. And something I was asking Tom about is, so one thing I think is pretty remarkable about the show and the Murder, She Wrote, brand is that, so Peter S. Fisher created the show, back in the day. And then I think, I forget what season it was, Tom said maybe after the 4th season or something like that, they renegotiated, and basically Peter left and Angela Lansbury negotiated it where she could own Murder, She Wrote, essentially, and own the show, which, I mean, for a woman to do that, I mean, a woman in general, but an older woman in the 90s, I mean, that's like crazy. I mean, that's like amazingly progressive for her to, I mean, it's like being a pioneer when it comes to TV, because I'm sure the only people who owned things like that were men back then. And even today, it's, it's still pretty unique, although now we have like Amy Poehler's and people like that and Tina Fey's. But I mean, she was really doing amazing work. The fact that she, said, I'm going to own this, and I'm, because she knew her worth. She knew that she was that important to the show, that if you want to keep me around, you want to keep this thing going, I want to be in control, which good for her. And I feel like had that not happened, we probably wouldn't have these books, right? Because I feel like I think sometimes TV executives just think about TV, but I wonder if, like, I don't know how that spark first came for the books, but I mean, I just feel like, what are your thoughts as a female writer, knowing that you're writing something that, a woman really just kind of, she steered that ship for so many years.
She did. And it was amazing, as you say, because, well, the other thing that you have to realize is that her husband, Jessica, and her husband, Peter, I think his name was, they were extremely close, and he had functioned in the business early in their marriage. So he knew a lot of stuff. Her brothers knew a lot of stuff because so she had a base. Like when she was figuring out how much she wanted to take this over, I'm sure this was a family project, because she had experts in the family that she could ask how to do that. Not that she needed to know how to do it, but is this plausible? Is this possible? If we change it this way? I mean, as I say, the change to Mort Metzger from, just for the Cabot Cove series, the parts of the series, the change from Tupper to Metzger was remarkable. Then there was when she got tired of working 8 hours a day. There was the bookend. I think that was like season 7 or so, season 6 up there. And the bookends were, she introduced the story, and then it was somebody else's story. And then at the end, she did the wrap. So she wasn't actually in the story. And then the audience didn't receive that well, so they phased that out after a while. but she also decided that she wasn't going to work as many days as they wanted to. So they changed how many production days for each series from 8 to 7. So that because it took them 8 days and it was too much for her. She was tired, but without her, there was no show because she's the star and she created a character that is a phenomenon still today. So I think there was a lot involved in her needing more control so she could control her own life. If you're not in charge, you have to do what they tell you. And she wanted to control her own life. So kudos to her. She's my idol.
Yeah, it's huge. And I think that's really wise because as you get older, I mean, like I said, even in my 30s now, I recently changed my work schedule because I was like, I want to be in control of it and not necessarily you get burnt out.
Most people can't do that. But if you have the opportunity to do that, and she did, and she knew she was providing a comfortable future for her family.
Yep.
I don't think she realized that there would still be, profit coming in this long, but she was setting up something. And the other thing is, in the very beginning of the show, it was like if Murder, She Wrote was Sunday night at 8:00 till the last season. And I would be in my mother's house with my husband and my kids. And at 6:30, I'd start going insane that we have to get ready to go home. And my husband, the calmest man in America, would always be like, don't worry, we have plenty of time. And I'm like, no, I don't want to miss the beginning. And he'd be like, I mean, I lived in Queens. My mother lived in the Bronx. It wasn't like we were coming from Chicago. And my husband would always say, it's going to be, and I'd be like, no, there could be traffic on the bridge because there was no DVD. There was no video. There was nothing. If you missed it, you missed it. And you hope it comes back in the summer on the reruns because not every episode came back on the reruns. So once we had this opportunity of having all these channels, which we had 13 channels back then. We didn't have all these channels. Now you have all these channels and they pick stuff up. I own the complete set of the series and the 4 movies. I can watch anything I want anytime. And I've owned them for years. And I'm sure I'm not the only Murder, She Wrote fan who owns them, So now you have that flexibility with every TV show. So she couldn't have forecasted that. She was looking for control of her life and maybe, a little profit for after. But it just blossomed.
Yeah. I own the box set as well in the movies. And it's nice to have that. So with the family, so knowing that, I guess now the family owns the Murder, She Wrote brand. How did that work? I mean, she was obviously alive for the past, books. And obviously, I doubt she had a hand in the approving anything. She probably had people who did that for her. But how did that work, at least in your experience with the books and the family? I mean, would you just did you ever interact with the family, or was it just you went through someone else who communicated with the family? I'm just curious, how they even go about making sure that they put their stamp.
I have no idea. I would assume that what they call Universal Studio, that owns the rights to Murder, She Wrote, they may deal with the family, and then they deal with the book company. But I had no. I was very fortunate. Death on the Emerald Isle was going to print when when Angela Lansbury passed away. And so I was able to change the dedication because the print guys were very, very wonderful. The book is now dedicated to Angela Lansbury. And I signed copies of it, and it's like I know a guy who knows a guy. I know a guy who knows a guy who got me a mailing address. And I sent copies, signed copies to Jessica, I keep doing that, to Angela's family.
Mm.
And, but that was the only time I even looked for them. Because, my business partner, if you would, is Berkeley Prime Crime.
Right.
Like whatever their relationships are with the family or Universal. As I say, the whole time the negotiations were going on with Universal, I had no idea what they were talking about. It doesn't affect me until somebody says, you got to write more books.
Right.
I mean, nobody's going to say to me, what do you think we should do with this contract? Well, I think you should give me $1 million, but they're not going to listen to me. It has nothing to do with me. It doesn't affect me at all until there's a contract between the two of them that allows Berkeley to move forward with writing, hiring somebody to write more books.
Yeah. I had the honor of meeting her, Angela Lansbury,
Oh, wow.
in DC. So the way I did it was I reached out to, we were going to go see Blythe Spirit in DC, and
Yes.
Spirit she won a Tony for on Broadway. And I'd
Mhm.
seen her on Broadway, and Gore Vidal's the best man, and she's great. And I said to my wife, let's go see her in DC, because her parents lived in DC at the time. So we went, and before we went, I said, you know what? I'm going to reach out to the theater. This is a long shot, but I'm going to see if we can try and meet her. So I reached out to the theater and I said, hey, I'm friends with Thomas B. Sawyer, the former head writer of Murder, She Wrote. He's obviously friends with Angela. Don't know if it's possible, but it'd be great to, say hello to her while we're there before or after the show. And they got back to me and said, sure. And I was like, wow, okay. So we went to the show, she performed, and then we waited for her after. And I was like almost nervous. And I normally don't get too nervous with celebrities, but I was like, wow, I'm about to meet Angela Lansbury. This is a big deal. And my wife's like, what's the big deal? I said, to me, she's like, at the time, it's like she's the greatest living actress. I was like, this is a huge deal. And
Yes.
she came out and she was holding these glasses that I swear would look like they would have been Jessica Fletcher glasses. And, I told her about how I saw her in New York, and she said, oh, you're a lover of the theater. And I mentioned Tom, and she, talked about him, and she signed our playbills and got a photo. And it was brief, but it was really just wonderful to have that moment. And yeah, she's just an incredible actress in person, and glad that I had that opportunity. And so you were talking, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to get sidetracked, but I just wanted to share.
No, that's an excellent story. Thank you for telling us.
Yeah. So when you are, typically, like I said, you're doing 2 books a year. So I guess I have a couple questions. One is, when you were doing 2 Murder, She Wrote books a year, is that all you wrote that year? Or would you also fit in one of your own books, meaning like you'd have to write 3? And what was your frequency of publishing prior to doing these books? Were you only doing 1 book a year? And what was that? How did you get it to the point where you're able to do more than 1?
Oh, I was very fortunate. It's all what happens in your life. I was writing a series of beach books. And as an aside here, I will say the beach books take place in Fort Myers Beach, Florida, which has been devastated by Hurricane Ian. Absolutely devastated. People down there are working very hard. They're going to bring that community back. I would encourage anybody to, send them prayers and thoughts or whatever your mechanism is, because the livelihood of so many people, I mean, they can't get their mail. The new congressman is trying to get the postmaster to set up mail stations so people can get there, because, you can't, it's been difficult, and the people down there are working really hard. They're coming back strong. Anyway, that's my little speech for that wonderful community. So I was writing those books, and an author named Laura Childs, who is magnificent, read one of my books. And she was looking for a partner to help her with one of her series because at the time she was writing 3 books a year. So I started co-writing with her. So I was writing my book and working with her on one of her books. And I was doing that for a while. Then my series got canceled. So I was in the middle of working with Laura, and I got the phone call for these. So once I was doing 2 books a year on this series, Laura and she was doing 2 books a year besides the series she and I wrote together. So we were never able to hook up again to do that, because that would be a 3rd book for each of us. So 2 is difficult. I will say I write all the time. I work all the time. I have, you know, a very limited personal life. But you know, it is what it is. This is the job. And the job is, you know, I had asked originally, because the original contract I signed was for 4 books in 2 years. And I was like, can't we just do 2? And they were like, no. And I said, okay. I mean, you know, you want the job, you say, okay. Yeah. So I don't have to ride the subway. I get up and I can walk from my bed to my computer in under 35 seconds. And I work every day. You know, what I try to do is, like, if I have a doctor's appointment, then I'll go to the doctor, the library, the supermarket, the specialty shop. I'll do everything once I'm out of the house. But on many days, except for my exercise, which is either walking or biking, I stay home and I work. Because that's what you got to do to write 2 books a year. Because while you're writing one, you're doing the PR for the last one.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a whole thing. And you're planning the next one. So there's always, plus you're getting the emails. And one of the things that never occurred to me when I started writing, because when I used to want to write fan letters to writers, you had to send the fan letter to the publisher. You know, to the writer, care of the publisher. And it never occurred to me I'd have all this direct communication with, you know, people who read what I write. It's amazing. You know, it really is interesting. So that's what I do. I write.
That's great. So now knowing that you're kind of, you know, waiting, I guess, for word on the next 2 books for Murder, She Wrote. What are you working on currently? Is there something else that you have?
I'm working on the next 2 books for Murder, She Wrote.
Oh, you are? Okay. So
yeah, you can't wait for these people. Laura Childs taught me that. Don't wait. You wait for that. I mean, I'm gonna get a contract that my agent has it, so I'll see it probably this week.
Right.
And the first book on that contract is probably going to be due in like 2 months or 3 months.
Oh, from now.
I've already written the synopsis, sent it to the editor. She's already sent it back to me, and I'm working on the book. You can't wait, because I don't know what the due dates are going to be. The due dates, I am now convinced, have nothing to do with me. They have to do with punching it into the schedule for every department that's going to work on this book right up until print and distribution. And that, you know, I can't say, you didn't give me enough time, when all these people are waiting to do their job. I mean, right. I'm going to write the book. I'm going to send it to my editor. She's going to look at it. If she has questions or comments, it's going to come back. Then it's going to go to a copy editor. Then it's going to go to some printer guy. They're going to format it. Then it's going to come back. Each step, it comes back to me. And then at the very end, they'll send it to somebody called the cold reader. And the cold reader will read it, because he's a person that's not seen it through the whole process. And he'll send back any questions or comments of things we might have missed. If I don't do my piece everywhere along that process, and it slows things down, then we never get to ship the book to the bookstores.
Right.
So that's kind of how it goes. You can't wait for these people. Technically, you're supposed to wait, but you can't.
Well, I'm sure people are happy to hear that you're not waiting. And how long does it take you to write that first draft? I mean, if they're asking for it in a few months, I mean, how quickly are you able to actually complete that first draft that you would send to the editor?
Oh, I don't send the editor the first draft. I send the editor a complete book.
Okay.
I
So
did.
how many drafts do you, I guess that's, yeah.
Oh, you want to know how many drafts I write? Okay.
Yeah.
Here's what I do. I write about the first third of the book. And when I get there, roughly a third, because I do this 3 times, so it must be about a third. I get to there and I stop and I go back and I go over it until I'm happy with that. Then I write the middle of the book, go over it till I'm happy with that. And then I write the end, go over it till I'm happy with that. Then I read them all together. This is not what normal writers do. This is just what I do. Then I read them all together, and they might be a little piece, but basically I've already done like 5 drafts of 3 sections, of the book in sections. And then I might revise the full book once or twice, but it's not a lot of revision at that point because I've done it before. I'm the lady you see in the corner of your dentist's office while you're waiting to get your teeth cleaned. And I got stacks of paper and I'm crossing stuff out and moving things around. That's me. I have a neighbor who worked in our local library, and she found me in the back in the corner one day. And she was laughing. She said, I always knew you writers were a little weird. But there I was. I had a pile of books because I was looking something up, and I had a pile of papers because I was editing, because what I looked up told me that what I had written wasn't correct. It was, some real thing. But that's kind of how I do it. I used to do the draft from beginning to end, but I found that process wasn't good for me. I'm better sectionally. So I might do 5 drafts on the first third and only 3 drafts on the second third, and 5 more drafts on the third, and 1 second draft on the whole book. So that it's weird. I know everybody.
No, that's really interesting, and I can relate. So I do writing, like my day job now.
Yes.
Is doing writing for I write content for law firms, and a lot of that is you have different headings. So I'll write the headings as their own chunk of content, and then once that's good, then I'll try and add in little transitions between this section to that section.
Yes.
And I'm wondering, when you have your chunks, once you feel good about the chunk, are you then paying attention to, okay, but does this, third of the book flow nicely into this one, and then this flow into the ending, just so they have kind of a cohesive feel? I assume that's probably part of that last process, right?
No, almost. That happens chapter by chapter. I like the end of a chapter. Like, say if a book is going to have, which I never know exactly how many chapters it's going to have, but for argument's sake, say there was going to be 30, so it'd be 10, 10, and 10, just say. But at the end of a chapter, not every chapter, but many chapters, there'll be a little foreshadowing of what's going to happen in the next chapter. So that's your transition in my mind. I don't section the book on what's happening. The chapters are what's happening. I almost section them on word count. Like if a book has to be, 75,000 words, then 25,000, but it's not exactly 25,000 because I do this, I end at a chapter. And I know it's weird. It's funny. It's like when people ask how Laura and I work together, I can tell you the exact process and how we do it, but I often caution with no 2 writing teams does it exactly the same. because you got to find, and my writing process and her writing process are different, and she's much faster than me. So I always had to try to catch up, because she could sit down and write, a 3,000 word chapter in a couple of hours. That would take me 3 days.
Mm.
So, every writer is completely different, and you just have to sort of ease into what works for you.
Absolutely. And so,
oh, go ahead.
no, I was going to say, well, obviously what you're doing is working because people really seem to enjoy it. So,
Oh, thank you.
yeah. And then when I was mentioning the titles of the books, right? You have King in a Koi Pond, Debonair in Death, Killer on the Court, and then the newest one, Death on Emerald Isle. So do those titles go through many changes, or do you say, hey, here's the title I'm thinking, and do they typically say, yep, sounds good, or is there much tweaking when it comes to actual titles?
Tweak. Here's how this works. I can tell you quite candidly that in all the books I've written, Well Read Then Dead, which was the first beach book, is my title, and Killing on a Koi Pond is my title. The rest of them, these are not my titles. Here's how it works. You submit a title and the synopsis, say, to your editor. They have a cover copy meeting. Now the book's not written, but this is why you gotta go with the process. They have a cover copy meeting, and the editor, in my case is a she, the editor explains to them what the story's going to be about, and all these big cover copy people, whoever they may be, come up with what should be on the cover, maybe what it's for the art department too, what the cover should look like and what the title should be. And when that team decides the title, I basically say, okay, because they have, I can tell you the next Murder, She Wrote book, this is a big news flash now. The next Murder, She Wrote book, I submitted the title, Murder, She Wrote, Exercised to Death. The title will now be Murder, She Wrote, Fit for Murder.
Oh.
I mean, they're the experts. I was fine with exercise. I would be fine with what, I don't care. I mean, like I have a title, I need a title in my head to write the synopsis. But when they look at the overall thing, a guy, gets killed in a gym. There's no secret. I mean, it'll be on the cover copy someplace that the guy gets killed in a gym. The guy is going to get killed in a gym. So I thought exercise, and they thought fit. And, it's a nice title, Fit for Murder. It's good. They're very kind.
Yeah.
The editor sends me a list of titles they're considering and asks my opinion. So of course I say, I like this one, I don't like that one, this one, but they're just being courteous. They're paying for this. They got to pay for the artwork and the how it looks and all that stuff. So that's how it goes. So as I say, 11 books, and I've come up with the title for 2. So that's not bad.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're doing pretty good.
Yeah, listen, there are things worth fighting for and things worth fighting about. That's not one of them.
No.
I'm professional at writing the books. I'm not professional at making up titles.
Yeah, and have you noticed, is there any sort of sense to when they release them? I mean, you've had some that have come out. Obviously, the new one came out, I guess it was January, right?
Yes.
Then you've had ones that are released in November and May, and because I always think like, okay, they're trying to get one out maybe around the holidays, so people buy it as a gift for family or whoever. Like that makes sense. But is there ever another time? Well, I guess maybe a beach read, right? So I guess another time would be leading into summer might be a good time Do they ever give you any sense of why they release them when they release them?
Yes, the books normally were one in the spring and one in the fall. As you say, November was the May and November.
Mm.
During the pandemic, there was a paper issue. So one of my May books didn't come out until June.
Hmm.
But the November book still came out in November because they said they had paper. They didn't know if they had enough. They were sliding books out. Most of the publishing companies were sliding books out because they were afraid they wouldn't be able to get the paper. So it was easier to just change the release date. Emerald Isle was supposed to come out in November, this previous November. However, I got a notification, I think in the summer, because they already hadn't come to an agreement with Universal. So they kind of knew we weren't going to have a second, we weren't going to have two books this year. So the easiest thing to do was to slide that. I mean, I'm making up why they did it, but I think I'm right. They slid the book from November to January. It's going to be the only book this year because of the license agreement.
Right.
So rather than skip an entire year, they just rolled it out. Now, my expectation is that the next book will come out next January.
That's what I would think. Right. So there's less of a gap.
Right.
Than waiting until like the following May.
Yeah. I mean, there are instances. There was a small gap when they transferred from Dawn to John, because obviously John needed time to catch up with what Dawn had been doing.
Yeah.
And then he went right on, the schedule. Now, what the schedule will be now, because it used to be May and November. Now, if this next book comes out in January, will the following book come out in the summer? Will they switch back? I mean, I have no idea. I don't know. I mean, I'll know eventually, but I don't know now.
Yeah.
But that, it's all business. Again, that's why I always say writing's a job, publishing's a business. That's the business end of it.
Right. Focus on what you can control.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Otherwise, you drive yourself crazy. The audiobooks, I did want to ask you about these, before we wind down here. I think the audiobooks are actually really entertaining, and they seem to find these narrators, and I assume they tell them, hey, narrate in a Jessica Fletcher type voice.
Yeah.
It's actually really good. I really enjoy them. Because it's like you're listening to Angela Lansbury read you the book. Basically. I mean, I think they're very fantastic. Good.
Yeah.
Are you an audiobook fan yourself? And what are your thoughts on, the audiobook versions of what you've written?
I've only heard one book, and I actually forget which one it was. I think it was Debonair, not Koi Pond. It was Debonair and Death. I enjoyed it very much. I find that as I'm getting older, reading is sometimes more like paperbacks are hard to read now. I can still read them with my glasses, I'm fine. But some books I read on the Kindle, some books I listen to in audio. The only problem I have with audiobooks is that I keep feeling like because I can hear it, I should be doing something else. I should be washing the kitchen floor. I should be, I can't, like with a book, you have to sit down and read it. But with the audio, I have to force myself. So what I do is like make lunch and listen to it for a chapter or two, and then listen at dinner for a chapter or two, because otherwise, and I am not, the happy cleaning person, but you just feel like, and I have friends who only do audio, and they can sit and put their feet up and be entranced. And I want to get to that stage because I think audiobooks serve a great purpose. One of my granddaughters, who actually got me into audio, when she would have to read a book for school, she would get the book and get the audio on the Kindle. So she'd have the book and the audio on the Kindle, and they would read to her. And she used to say to me, Grandma, it's like bedtime stories. And I'd be like, okay, so she probably for the rest of her life will be a big audio person. I came very late to audio, but I do like it. I find it relaxing, except for this instinct that I should be doing two things at once. But, when I can sit and listen to it, I enjoy it very much. And I think it's got a huge future because you can listen to them in the car. I used to do that. I don't do long drives anymore, but when I used to have to do long drives, well, back in the old days, it was things you put in the car, like you could play
Like
it
a
in the
cassette
car.
tape or a CD.
Yeah, tape. That was it, cassette tapes. And I still have a whole bunch of books on cassette tape. There's no place to play them anymore, but I have them, that driving in the car, it's a miracle. You could listen to music, which I like to do, but it's much more relaxing to listen to a story when you're on a long ride. I used to go to a place once or twice a year that was a 3-hour ride each way. And I always listen to books because 3 hours in the car makes me nervous, even with music, but 3 hours in the car with a book is like I'm sitting in the library.
Yeah. And I think it's, so we have a baby. He's like 4 months
Oh,
old,
God bless.
4.5. And I'm actually sitting in his room right now. But
Ooh.
when I would feed him, every time I feed him at night, his like last bottle of the night, I'll just play an audiobook while he's, sucking on the bottle. So, and your book was one of the ones that we listened to. So I would be playing that in the background, feeding him. And then I would read him his books. But I figure,
Yes.
as you mentioned with your granddaughter, I think it's really interesting because years ago when you thought of books on tape and stuff, you probably may have thought, oh, people who can't, maybe people who are blind and want to listen to a book, like almost like it's
Right.
like targeted towards like a disability type audience. Where
Yes, no
nowadays
more.
there's so much content for kids and younger people that it's kind of funny that the younger generation is embracing this digital version of a technology that's been around for decades, but
Yes.
now it's really resonating with them, probably because of people listening to podcasts and always like streaming audio.
Yeah.
It was kind of ahead of its time, and now it really fits in well.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's wonderful because if you, like I say, for me, it was long rides in the car, which I'm glad you brought this up because I had forgotten about that. But just to be able to, I'm going to say, many of the people who read the books, they have such relaxing voices. I mean, it's modulated to keep you calm and happy. When there's an exciting thing, the music behind the speaker will go da 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 or something like that. But overall, it's very, calming. So your baby's a lucky boy. He hears.
Yeah, hopefully he'll be really smart because he's getting audiobooks, he's getting physical books, he's getting lots of words thrown at him.
You can't. I say this as a mother and a grandmother. You cannot give a child enough exposure to reading, music, audiobooks. The more things you expose them to, and then they pick for themselves. Which I have 7 grandchildren, 4 of whom are avid readers. The other 3 read, but 4 of them I can tell you. If I don't know what to buy one of those for Christmas or birthdays, I know if I get a couple of books, I'm in good shape.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this has been wonderful. So, thank you, Terrie, for joining me. Everyone, once again, this is Terrie Farley Moran, and make sure to look her up on Amazon, buy her Murder, She Wrote books and her other books. Really great stuff, and just a fantastic cozy writer. And I think cozy books to me are kind of like the comfort food of mystery writing and thrillers, because they're just, I don't know, it's like a nice warm blanket, right? You're not going to get anything jarring or triggering or anything like that. you're just gonna have a nice mystery and kind of go along for the ride and just enjoy yourself. I mean, I think that it's just very comforting. So, thank you for giving us, especially during the pandemic, something to escape, into a safer world and enjoy.
Oh, thank you for having me. This has been lovely. I appreciate it. I really do. Thank you very much.